Hey everybody, so I promised you a video on factorial ANOVAs, and so that is what I'm going to be doing right now. I'm just going to be going through an exercise with a factorial ANOVA. So I've kind of drawn everything out on a board that I'll be showing you as we go along. But by the end of this video, I really want for you to understand what a factorial ANOVA is, what a main effect is, what marginal means are, what cell means are, and what an interaction is. So hopefully by the end you'll be able to talk about those things. But of course at the end, if you still have questions, please email me and I'll be happy to answer those. So let me start sort of at the beginning. Let me come down here so I'm not showing you everything all at once. Okay, so very first thing is that in this particular example, we are going to be doing a 2x3 factorial design. So I'm going to do a little quizzing of you right now. So I want for you to prepare yourself for that and answer the questions. I'll give a little pause. In a 2x3 factorial design, how many independent variables do you have? Okay, you have two independent variables. Each number represents an independent variable. So this 2 here represents an independent variable, and the 3 represents an independent variable. Now, why is this number a 2? Well, the reason is that this particular independent variable has 2 levels. Okay, 2 levels, 2 conditions, however you want to think about it. This particular independent variable has 3 levels. Okay, so three groups. If I were to draw this out in boxes, which I will be doing soon, that would sort of give you an indication as to how many total groups or total conditions there are. And you can also just multiply these things together. Okay, so a 2x3 design has how many total conditions? 6. Okay, 6 total conditions. Okay. In terms of the main effects, we're going to be talking a lot about main effects and interactions, so it's important for you to understand where those come from. In a 2x3 design, how many main effects can you have? 2. And you can have 2 main effects because you have 1 main effect for each independent variable. Okay, so this independent variable, you can have a main effect of that, and you can have a main effect of this independent variable. All right, so however many independent variables you have, that's how many main effects you can have. In terms of interactions, an interaction involves 2 independent variables interacting. Okay, we only have 2 independent variables here, right? The 2 and the 3, and they can interact. So that is 1 interaction. Okay, there's only 1 possible interaction here. Okay, so let me sort of introduce you to this design that I'm going to be using. I decided to come up with a couple of things that I thought might be related to test performance. So if you see down here, sorry, test performance is our dependent variable. Okay, and that's what all the numbers that you see are going to represent. They're going to basically be representing grades. All right, so test performance is the dependent variable. I have 2 independent variables, again, because it's a 2x3 design. There's 2 independent variables. The first independent variable is encouragement, and the second independent variable is called tutoring. So there's obviously a lot of research out there showing that going to tutoring will help improve your test grades, but there's also research out there showing that just being encouraged can help improve your test grades. So the purpose of this study is to sort of look and see, does encouragement improve test grades? Does tutoring improve test grades? And do those 2 variables interact? So does the impact of encouragement on test performance change depending on whether or not people are going to tutoring? Okay, you see how that's an interaction idea, right? It's sort of like, does the impact of being encouraged, right, on test grades? So normally we think this would be a positive impact, right? Is that true all the time, right? Does it change depending on if you're going to tutoring, if you're being tutored by a professor, a tutor, or no tutoring? I don't know, we'll see. Okay, but that's an interaction is a little more complicated because it's involving both independent variables and their effect together on the dependent variable. In this particular example, I've decided that encouragement is going to be my independent variable that has 2 levels. So we're just going to have people are coming in and they're going to be encouraged or not. Okay, so yes or no. Tutoring is going to be my variable with 3 levels. So I couldn't just do yes or no here, so I made it a little bit more complicated because I needed 3 levels. So I decided to say your professor could be tutoring you, the tutor could be tutoring you, or no tutoring. Okay. All right, so that's the basis for the design, this 2x3 design. So I put it out in our beautiful boxes. So let me come closer here so you can see it. So I drew the 2x3 design, and then I went ahead and filled in some numbers for these. Now, I was having a conversation with a student the other day who was asking me if these were just random numbers, because sometimes I say things like that. So I'll say, oh, just put it, the numbers aren't coming from anywhere, just make them up, okay? That is true. You are making them up. But they aren't actually random, or they shouldn't be, because, I mean, they should make sense to you. Right? Would it be weird right here if for test performance I had a score of 145? Probably, right? Because we're thinking test performance is probably on a scale of 0 to 100. So if I come up with a score and put a 145 in one of these boxes, it doesn't seem to make as much sense as to what I'm talking about. So I made sure that my numbers range from 0 to 100. In addition, I tried to make them make sense. Like, I obviously think that tutoring is helpful, so going to tutoring should end up with higher grades than not going to tutoring. And I also think and would hypothesize that being encouraged should also lead to better test grades. So I'm going to try to make sure that some of my numbers indicate that as well. Okay? So they're not completely random. They have some thought behind them, but I am making them up. Okay? All right, so let's talk about these. I started with my group of participants who are going to come in and they're going to get encouragement and they're going to get the professor to tutor them. So these people here. I decided that on average, these people would have a grade of about an 80. And I used that 80 as my anchor for all my other numbers. So I'd be like, okay, these people should be doing about the best, you know, so I put them at an 80. Here, these are the people who are in the encouragement group and are being tutored by the tutor, and they're still doing pretty well compared to the 80. I mean, they were 75. These are the people who are getting encouragement, but they're not getting any tutoring, and so we said that their average would be a 60. Okay? So I did the same thing for the other groups, so the people who were not receiving any encouragement. So down here, people not receiving encouragement but who are getting a professor to tutor them get an 80. People who are not getting encouraged but have a tutor tutoring them, 75. And then people who are not getting encouraged and not getting tutoring are getting a 50. Okay, so part of the challenge in terms of your exam is going to be just coming up with a design and having it make sense. One thing that I saw in terms of some problems with some of your designs on your homework was that you were making like one of the independent variables the same thing as the dependent variable, okay, which was confusing, and it was hard in some ways for me to figure out how to put you back on the right path, because if you're calling this test performance and this test performance, then it doesn't end up making sense, okay? So make sure when you're designing your study that your independent variables are different things. They're things that you are doing to the study, or they're things that are impacting the dependent variable, okay? So I could have come up with a lot of different types of things that might impact test performance, right? Instead of encouragement and tutoring. I could have done sleep, right? Or caffeine. Anything that I thought might impact test performance I could have used as my independent variables. Okay, so just make sure that your independent variables are distinct and different from your dependent variables. Okay, so once you've designed the study, you've come up with your means inside the boxes. The means inside the boxes are called cell means, and we'll need them when it comes to predicting and understanding the interaction. Now, something that I don't have on here are the marginal means. So I'm going to need those. So let me explain a little bit of what marginal means are. A marginal mean is a mean that represents one of the levels of my independent variable, ignoring the other independent variable. So for example, I might be very interested in whether or not encouragement impacts test performance. That was one of my primary questions. Does encouragement impact test performance? So I want to look at that. I want to look at my people who are encouraged versus my people who are not encouraged. Well, currently, my problem is that my people who are encouraged have 3 numbers, and I don't want to deal with 3 numbers, okay? My people who are not being encouraged have 3 numbers, and I don't want to deal with 3 numbers. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to average the top row, and I'm going to average the bottom row. And then I'll have 1 number to represent the people who are being encouraged, and 1 number to represent the people who are not being encouraged. Okay, so we're going to do that. Get my little calculator out. Okay, so for my yes encouragement group, I'm going to add together 80 plus 75 plus 60 divided by 3. Okay, and I'm dividing by 3 obviously because there's 3 different means. So that answer is going to be a 71.67. I'm going to write that on here. Okay, 71.67. All right, so next I need to do the people who are not being encouraged. So similarly, I'm going to do 80 plus 75 plus 50 divided by 3, and I should get 68.33. All right. So those 2 numbers tell me about my main effect of encouragement, okay? Is there a possible significant main effect of encouragement? Well, we're not doing all the math to figure out if this is really a significant difference in test grades here. But in looking at it, I would think that it does look like people who are being encouraged are doing better than people who are not being encouraged. So it looks that way to me. Their numbers are sort of similar, so I just don't know if they would be significant, but it's certainly possible that it would be a significant difference. Okay, so we have this for encouragement. That's our main effect of encouragement. If I were putting that in words, I would say that participants who are in the encouragement conditions are performing better in their tests than participants who are not in the encouragement conditions. Okay, but I also need to talk about my main effect of tutoring. I haven't done that yet. So same situation here. I've got multiple numbers for each of these tutoring categories, and I don't want to deal with these multiple numbers. So for example, for the professor doing the tutoring, I have an 80 and an 80, and I just need the average of those 2 numbers. Okay, so the average of an 80 and 80 is an 80, and we'll have the average of the tutor doing the tutoring. Average of 75 and 75 should give you a 75. And then here, where we have no tutoring whatsoever, we have a 60 and a 50, so we're going to average those together too. So I'm going to go ahead and put that here. 80, 75, and the average of a 60 and a 50 is a 55. Okay. So same situation here. I kind of need to explain what is happening, right? So my question is whether or not tutoring impacts test performance. And so I'm looking at these numbers and they're different. So it's possible that this main effect could be significant, right? So it looks like people who are in the professor doing the tutoring condition are doing the best, but closely followed by people who are in the tutoring condition with the tutors. And then obviously these people over here who are not getting any tutoring are doing the worst. Okay, so that's just my summary of that particular main effect. All right, so once we've described our main effect of encouragement, our main effect of tutoring, then we can talk about the interaction. Now remember, there's only one possible interaction, but it's going to involve all of these cell means, all the means inside the boxes. So when I was describing this to you in class, I said that if the pattern on each row, like if the pattern on this row matches the pattern on this row, then an interaction is not even possible. Okay? But if we see a pattern change, then an interaction is possible. So that's our first step, is just recognizing if an interaction is possible to begin with. So here, when we're looking at just the top row, we have an 80 going to a 75. So we go down by 5. And then going from a 75 to a 60, we go down by 15. So down by 5, down by 15. Now if we see that same pattern in the next row, then an interaction is not possible. Okay? So in the next row, we have down by 5, but instead of going down by 15 here, we go down by 25. So because it's different, the pattern on the bottom row is different than the pattern on the top row, we have an interaction that could be significant. Okay? And so that is important to be able to recognize. All right, you will need to recognize that for your exam, that if the patterns match across the rows, then it's not possible to have a significant interaction. But if the patterns don't match, then you could have a significant interaction. But the more challenging part is explaining what this means. Okay, so let's talk about that. It looks like what we're finding here is that when you are looking at the professor doing the tutoring, let's look here, professor doing the tutoring, encouragement doesn't matter, right? I mean, the people who are being encouraged and having the professor tutor them are doing the same as the people who are not being encouraged and having the professor tutor them, okay? There's no change there. Here, same situation. Encouragement is not mattering at all for the people who are being tutored by the tutor, okay? But a change here, right? Here we see that encouragement does matter. So when you're not receiving any tutoring, encouragement is going to matter, okay? So putting this all into words, you would say that for participants who are receiving some kind of tutoring, whether it be by the professor or the tutor, encouragement doesn't impact their test performance, right? But if they're not being tutored, then being encouraged will increase their test scores. Okay? So that would be how I would summarize that finding, is I just look and try to explain what's going on here, what makes sense. All right, so that's what I want for you to be able to do when you're looking at your cell means, to be able to work through and say, like, if there's a change in a pattern, like why, what's happening, what's going on with that change in pattern, okay? All right, next and last thing has to do with our bar graph. Okay, so the bar graph is not too challenging as long as you've practiced enough and know a little bit about what you're doing. So I might tilt this down a little bit so we can see it. Okay. All right. So what I have here is my beautiful bar graph. The very first thing that you have to remember is that your dependent variable goes over here on the y-axis. Some of you guys on your homework left the label off here, and it's important that you write the dependent variable's name right here. It's a good reminder that this is what the numbers mean. All right, all these numbers are referring to test performance, okay? In terms of which independent variable goes on the bottom and which independent variable designates the different kind of bars, that is completely up to you. I just decided to put tutoring on the bottom and use encouragement over here to illustrate the bars. Okay, so for my professor group, I had to draw the people who were being tutored by the professor and were receiving encouragement. That's these people. So they have an 80. So I made my bar graph go all the way up to my 8 bar. Okay. And I see the exact same effect for people who are being tutored by the professor and are not being encouraged, these people. So they also went up to an 80. I did the same thing here with my 75s, right? So they're right next to each other, the same number. One's representing my people who are being tutored by a tutor and are getting encouragement, and then the people who are being tutored by a tutor and are not getting encouragement. And then finally over here we have my people who are not being tutored but are getting encouragement or not getting encouragement. Okay, so this is the only one that had the difference, as you remember, the 60 and the 50. Okay? Okay, so hopefully that makes sense to you, and this has cleared up some of your Factorial ANOVA questions. If it has not cleared up some of your Factorial ANOVA questions, then I really would like for you to email me and ask me whatever you need to about it. If you want to refer to this particular example, feel free to do that, and we can take it from there. So thank you. I hope it was helpful. And again, email me if you need anything.